Good morning, brothers and sisters. Welcome to week 3 of Easter, the third week of Easter, and probably around the 6th week that we've been walking through these coronavirus-ridden days. So wherever you're seeing this, just welcome. Glad you're still with us. And I hope that these times, however difficult they may be, have actually been times where we can draw closer to Jesus, especially in the solitude that all of us have a little bit more of. So all to say, some of you know that I live with a group of priests called the Companions of Christ. So I live with 3 other priests just a few miles away from here at the St. Lawrence. And every week, Wednesday night, in all of our busy lives, we get together intentionally in the evening just to do a normal, what we call house check-in. And we just spend an hour, sometimes even an hour and a half, just asking the question, how are we actually doing at a personal level in the life of the community? Because we live fast-paced lives, even with everything that's going on, where a lot of things have slowed down. We live very fast-paced lives. We've got a lot of responsibilities. And so I ask you that question, just as you're sitting here watching this, how are you actually doing? Certainly I've been praying for you, but how might you answer that question more than just I'm fine or I'm really stressed, but if Jesus were to ask you that question, how are you actually doing with this? That's where we want to go, because Jesus is always wanting to come into our real life, not just our surfacey life, or I'm okay, I'm doing all right, I'm working through this, but whatever our answer is to how am I actually living, how am I actually doing amidst these circumstances, that's where Jesus wants to enter into. That's where the Christian life actually happens. The real life of Jesus, the resurrected life of Jesus, meeting me in my real life circumstances. And so that's actually how the gospel for this Sunday begins. So notice, I don't know if you've had the chance to read it, but I would invite you, even if you can, to pause this video right now and just read this Sunday's gospel, the story of Jesus walking with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. So this is just how the gospel begins. Now that very day, what's that very day? Easter Sunday. That very day, 2 of them were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus, and they were conversing upon all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stopped, looking downcast. So let's just pause there for one moment. Notice exactly what's happening. The disciples were walking along, talking, debating amongst themselves about their real life. Jesus himself drew near, even though their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. We don't know exactly what that means, but in the mystery of how Jesus works, he was walking with them, even though their eyes were prevented from seeing him in his glorified self. And he asked them a question. What were you talking about as you walked along the way? In other words, how are you doing? Where's your heart during this? Not just your surface level heart, not like I'm okay, you're okay, but like, where is your heart? What are you actually thinking about? What is consuming your attention? And that was the in for Jesus coming into their lives. Because notice then how they responded. They stopped. They didn't just keep walking, I'm okay, you're okay. They stopped, looking downcast. This gospel passage is called the road to Emmaus. But the deeper question is, well, what road are they walking on? Not just the road to Emmaus. They were actually walking along the road of sadness. That was where they were living. That's how they were doing. How are you doing, disciples? We're sad. Deeply sad, because we thought that Jesus of Nazareth was supposed to be the Messiah. And we have built our whole lives around him. And now that he has been crucified and died and buried, I don't even know what to base my life on anymore. That's how Jesus often desires to come into our lives, like into our real life circumstances. So the Christian life really only happens when I'm willing to disclose my real life to him. That's the life of prayer. That's the life of living in communion with Jesus. Because then notice what happens next. After they open up with that initial, how am I actually doing? They stopped, looking downcast. They were able to respond. Are you the only one that does not know what has happened in these days about the death of Jesus, the Christ, whom we thought was the Messiah? I'm paraphrasing a little bit because it's a longer gospel. But then notice the shift that occurs. When Jesus is walking with them, he told them about all that had been foretold of him in the prophets and the Psalms. In other words, this must happen, that Jesus must have gone to the cross. When they heard that, they said, were not our hearts burning within us when he opened the word to us? Brothers and sisters, this is really what it comes down to being Christian. It's to allow the life-giving power of the resurrected one of Jesus to enter into my real life, my sadness, my discouragement, my anxiety, and my fear. Because if that's not happening, Christ is a fantasy. It's true. I want to say it that bluntly. If Christ does not come into our real problems and make a difference there, then the one we worship is a fantasy. That's actually a direct quote from Luigi Giussani. He said, if Christ doesn't change the way I live my life and my problems, then Christ is a fantasy. Jesus Christ must change the way I'm living my normal circumstances. He must come into my problems. If not, then he's a fantasy. If Christ, the resurrected one, isn't somehow making a difference by how I see the world and see what's happening in my own life circumstances, then our Christianity is rather artificial, surfacey, and ultimately will never bear fruit. I must, as a disciple, be going through the difficulty, but the vulnerability of inviting Jesus into how am I actually doing, and inviting him into my real circumstances. The goal of especially praying with the Word of God, and this gospel in particular, is to have the same experience as the disciples. When they said, were not our hearts burning within us when he opened the Word to us? And they ran the 7 miles from Emmaus back to Jerusalem to tell the other disciples about what they had experienced. So all this to say, the two main fruits we want when praying with the Word of God into our real life, how am I actually doing, is in the words of St. Lawrence of Brindisi, who said, the Word of God gives light to the mind and a fire to the will. That's what we want to happen when we're praying with the Word of God, and at an overall level, living in communion with Jesus, wherever our life circumstances, whatever they are. We want our minds to be illuminated, not just to think the way of the worldly, not to think the way of CNN or Fox News, not the way of thinking about just the economy, not the way of just thinking about pop psychology, not just thinking about all the things that I'm being stripped of in my life. I want to have the mind of Jesus. And when I'm praying with the Word of God, when I'm living in communion with Jesus, he's giving a light to my mind. He's allowing my eyes to see him. And then the second thing that St. Lawrence of Brindisi says, the Word of God gives a fire to the will. It gets me up out of my chair. It gets me out of my discouragement. It gets me out of my fears. It gets me out of my anxiety and moves me. It impels me to live a different way. This is the task I just invite us, brothers and sisters, wherever you're seeing this, wherever you're watching this, the task of being Christian is to invite Jesus into my real life. How am I actually doing? So as to be able to see as he sees, and to be actually able to move away from these things that bind me, these things that are not of God, like fear or anxiety, that can restrict me. I want to live the life of Jesus in my real life. So I just invite you, again, I'm thankful that you're able to watch these videos, and if you find them helpful, feel free to comment, ask questions. We don't know how long this virtual reality is going to last, or how long these stay-at-home orders are going to last, so we want to make them all the more fruitful. So tell your friends, comment, ask questions. We want to really be able to respond to people's real life circumstances. So if you have questions, feel free to ask, feel free to comment. We want this, this virtual community, if you will, to be ever more fruitful. So God bless you, especially as we go forward in these Easter days. Hi, my name is Father Jake Anderson. I'm the pastor here at St. Lawrence Catholic Church in Newman Center. I'm so grateful that you're able to just watch some of these videos. We certainly have a lot of content. We're putting out videos every day. So just encourage you to do a little exploration and find that what we're offering to stay connected as the Catholic Church here at the U of M.